stuff. It used to be so easy to dismiss. But now, it's the Alex Jones was right meme. Like, and you realize how many times that guy's been right? Like, Jesus Christ. Like, how is he so good at predicting all these things that are happening? Because the guy's balls deep in it all day long.
Yeah.
You could call him right now. It's like, I'm doing the documents. I'm reading the research right now. This is sick. This is what they're doing. This is the plan. I talk to him all the time. We text each other. Every time something's crazy, I'll text him. Like, what is this? And he'll send me all these fucking documents.
He's talking about, I saw something he said the other day about, you gotta have your shit ready in case they turn the power off, turn the water off, do something like that.
Well, there's a lot of people that think that, including me. Because if I was a foreign government and I wanted to cripple America, I would kill the power grid. We'd go feral in 2 weeks.
It's disappointing when the most popular podcast in the world, Joe Rogan, actually supports still a guy who has made a living off misinformed the public, being more wrong than right. A clock is right, broken clock is right twice a day. Still doesn't mean that he's right. Now, why am I making this video? Because earlier today, there was a tweet by Alex Jones, retweeted by Richard Gage. Alex Jones, start by investigating Building 7. I have interviewed senior NYPD that heard the countdown for the controlled demolition of Tower 7 on 9/11. Now, if you just read the tweet like this, anyone outside of Alex Jones is going to assume that the NYPD are in on it. They know that the building was going to collapse from a controlled demolition. Richard Gage, a self-appointed expert on 9/11, said, World Trade Center 7, Building 7 is the Achilles heel of the official 9/11 story, the subject the media and government is most afraid of. And first of all, we just had the biggest breakthrough in 9/11 last year with the Cannistrell document release. You also had Operation Encore, the jail shame memorandum, which shows that there was an Israeli art student ring and moving companies that were spying on the DA, the FBI, and living in close proximity to all the 9/11 hijackers. No, Gage and Jones, they won't talk about that. Building 7. Now, just by these tweets alone, one will assume and say, well, the fire department and the police department had to be in on it, because how would they know about this countdown? Why was there a collapse zone? Well, who's in charge of the collapse zone? The fire department. And according to Alex Jones, he heard a countdown on the police radio. That means that they were in on it. And that's what the public's going to believe, that these members of the fire department who lost more lives than anybody else are going to be in on this conspiracy to collapse World Trade Center 7 for no reason. So, what I'm going to do that Alex Jones won't do, that Richard Gage can't do because he doesn't know about it, is I'm going to read a number of testimonies from the fire department who were actually inside World Trade Center 7 before it collapsed. And this is coming from a court case called the Con Edison versus Aegis Incorporated, and the matter of September 11 property damage and business loss litigation. Now, Merrill Legal Solutions was, they used their offices on West 25th West 45th Street in Suite 900. And they took all the testimony from the firemen that were in there. A number of them were fire chiefs who were surveying inside World Trade Center 7 to assess the damage from the fire and from the towers collapsing on top of them to see if the building could be saved. And I know that nobody's ever done this before. I don't know why. I mean, this is for the public record, but I think it goes against the narrative. Now, look, this video is also not saying, I'm not saying that World Trade Center 7 collapsed from fire. I'm not qualified to say that. That's another thing you won't hear Richard Gage ever say. or Alex Jones. I know my limitations. Now, this is one area I wish I knew more of because it's part of 9/11. But I don't. I stuck with the geopolitics, pre-intelligence, the understanding of foreign policy, how Israel and Saudi Arabia influence American politics, the origins of radical fundamentalism, this type of stuff. But I'm not an engineer or an architect. So when people say, well, how come you never talk about World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7? For one, I'm not here to give you my opinion. My whole channel is based on sharing information, stuff that is tangible, right? That you could take to court or learn from. I'm not in the business of misinforming people. I don't make money and I don't ask for money. I share information, and in the hopes that the people that follow my channel vet that information, check the information through the scientific method to see and understand the information is accurate or not. So this is going to be a comprehensive video. I'm not making it 2 hours long. It might reach an hour. I'll do it as fast as I can. But I want to read from you the words of the people that were there, not Richard Gage and Alex Jones, who weren't there. Read from the people who were there. This first document is from Anthony Varial. As you can see, Anthony Varial here, Merrill Legal Solutions, Volume 1. Is it possible for you to remember the first time that you had a discussion about the status of World Trade Center 7 prior to the 2 p.m. meeting? Now, some of this dictation is going to be in the middle of it or from the beginning. And to cut short of time, they basically, this is all that's public right now. And, because I want this to be a 2-hour video. Now, you'll see the questions are coming from either the defense or prosecution or the defense teams at Merrill Legal. They're going to be questioning the firemen who were there because this is a civil suit case, not a criminal case. Now, for those who don't know, the tenants at World Trade Center 7 had sued Con Edison because they blamed Con Edison for the generator in the bottom of the World Trade Center 7, which exploded and led to the collapse of World Trade Center 7, or helped weaken the building, which led to the collapse of World Trade Center 7. Like I said, I'm not saying that World Trade Center 7 didn't come down from improvised devices or was compromised. I'm not qualified to say that. I could give you my opinion, but what good is that? What are you going to do with opinion? Opinions are basically people seeking acceptance into a select group. I'm not looking for acceptance. I'm only accepting of information. I'm a data processor. So this is Anthony Varial. No, it was just a larger picture, and exactly, I know I discussed it with Chief Carruthers. I know I discussed it with Chief Fellini because they were major players in this decision-making process, and others that were there at the scene. Can you recall anything in particular about discussions that you had regarding structural damage to World Trade Center 7 prior to the 2 p.m. meeting, right? I'm going to make myself disappear here. Well, there was visible damage to the north, southwest corner of 7 that I was concerned about. And team that we had go in and survey came out and said there was serious structural damage. Now, we are not engineering teams, nor do we have time in our favor when we make these evaluations. So serious structural damage doesn't necessarily mean that our evaluation is the building is going to fall down. But it is enough that when you're in command, you want people inside to report to you changes in the situation or important things. You don't want later on someone to say, I noticed there were some columns or beams missing, but I didn't think it was important to tell you at the time, so I just didn't say anything. These are things that our chiefs would report right away to us and would consider very serious. If you're in a high-rise building and there is damage to any of the structural members of that building, that is considered to be very serious to us. So we certainly discussed the damage that we saw and fires in various locations and discussed well What is our ability to do anything about it? We have always made risk reward, and reliable sources told us that the building was completely vacated, that everyone was out of the building. So therefore, the risk reward equation gets pretty tilted. Now, you have an albeit a valuable three building, but a vacant building nonetheless to deal with. So it tilts you opposite of the World Trade Center, where you had damaged building with the potential for 25,000 people being inside. So the fact that you're going to say, well, I think we will pass on this operation today doesn't come into play for 1 and 2. On 7, you have a different decision to make if there are victims. It is the victims that you're bringing up, the victim that you're committing to the building. These are the things that we discussed prior to and at the meeting that will go into the decision. What are we going to do about 7? And what are we going to do about 90 West Street? What are we going to do about the surrounding buildings, 4, 5, and 6? How are we going to operate? Likelihood of people being in the building, rescues of our own members or civilians, that type of thing. Let me try to break it down a little more. Sure, I know you had observations of the building yourself, but what I would like to do is ask you. I will just ask you about that. But what I would like to do first is see if you can recall any of the specifics of reports that you got from members who saw structural damage to the outside of the building before the 2 p.m. meeting. Reports from other people that saw structural damage to the outside of the building before 2 o'clock? Again, I'm sure people would have made me aware of this, and it would have been their job to do that. But do I recall any specifics of it? I really don't. Can you recall any specifics of reports of damage inside the building told to you before 2 p.m.? Only that I met with Chief Fellini, who I tasked with putting some people. There are people, and then there are people whose opinions that we value that went into the building so that when they come out, they could give us information that is of value. So I know Deputy Chief Terry Roach was one of them, who was the senior chief at the time, a trusted individual. Al Hay was told to evaluate the building, who was a safety chief. A few others who I can't recall at this time, and I received, yes, when you reach Washington Street on the west side of the building, when you reach that intersection with Barclay, did you have an opportunity to see the west side of World Trade Center 7? Vaguely, I remember looking up at it. The whole rear of the building and the 2 exposures, which we call it, if you look from the front of the building to and 4, they looked intact. Just so I can understand, it would be the east side and west side of the building. Which is 2 and which is 4? 2 would be to Washington Street if the entrance is on Vesey. 2 would be on Washington, 3 would be on Barclay, and 4 would be on West Broadway. I take it to the south side would be 1? 1, that's correct. Do you recall seeing Washington Street as you passed it? Not really. At some point, you made your way to the command post, which I believe you said was at West and Vesey. That is correct. At that time, did you report into that command post? Yes. To whom did you report? Deputy Chief Fellini. Did you have a conversation with Deputy Chief Fellini? Just reported in, and I told him. I think there were only 1 or 2 guys with me at the time. I gave people a brief rundown of what we had done, and we were directed from him to start opening with units that were stretching lines, I believe, from the Hudson River. The 5 boats were running lines to start searches. There was a bridge, as you could see it there. We had to work our way underneath there and start searching and helping companies stretch lines from the fireboats. The bridge that you described being directed to by Deputy Chief Fellini, is that what is depicted on the map as the North Bridge? Yes. Before you left the post at West and Vesey, did you have any opportunity to see World Trade Center 7 from that vantage point? Yes. What can you recall seeing? I remember looking up and seeing the corner of Washington and Vesey. I remember looking up and seeing approximately anywhere from 10 to 15 floors gone. The corner I-beam missing, and the walls completely gone, and the interior. You could see the interior of each floor. And I remember saying to the firefighters with me, no wonder the deputy wanted us out of there. I can't believe that building is still standing. The damage was extensive. Can you approximate? I know you said that you estimated it was 10 to 15 floors of damage sort of going up in the building. Can you estimate where that damage began? I would say approximately midway to 2/3 of the way up. Let's go off the record for a second. We're going to take a quick break. All right. Now, they went back on break. I would like to ask you a few more questions about your observations of the southwest corner of the building. You estimated, I believe, 10 to 15 floors of damage. Do you have an estimate for, I'm sorry, the 10 to 15 floors I'm talking, it appeared that the corner I-beam was missing and that there were more floors that had damage throughout the front facade of the building, and several floors were completely exposed. The things that stood out were the I-beams were gone, the vertical I-beams. Now, that's one firefighter's perspective, right? Now, there's plenty more where that came from. And I'm not just going to read one, I'm going to read a couple, right? And, you know, this is just basically to inform the people about the massive amount of damage World Trade Center had, because nobody is going to basically talk about this, talk about it from the firefighter's perspective. Has anybody ever read these things? Right? Christopher Boyle, June 1st, 2009, right? Now, again, I'm not going to be in the pictures, so you don't need to see my face. Good morning, Chief Boyle. This is a Fire Chief Boyle. As I indicated a moment ago, my name is blah, 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 Deep Klein, right? So he was talking about how many years of service do you have? 25. What was your position? Blah, 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 right? I'm not going to read all this. I'm going to get to where he talks about 7. All right, we'll read from here. I think we could stipulate the North Tower came down about 10:29 or so. So would this be about 11 o'clock? That's probably correct, yes. What did you do when you arrived downtown? Initially, I grabbed all my members who were assigned to my task force, and we went to City Hall Park. Chief Herring was setting up a command post there. Did you report to him at that point? Yes, I did. Were assignments being given out at that point? Just as I got there, an assignment came in, so I jumped on it right away. I got my head in the circle. Everybody kind of clusters around, so I got in on that. What was the assignment? The assignment was to go to number 7, that they were going to try to put some lines into the operation. Did you actually, did anyone see, you knew at the command post? At the command post, I saw Battalion Chief Butch Brandis, and he was the one who was collecting BF4s, the riding list. You give them out at the command post where you report him. I said, what's going on? And he was flustered. There was no, Herring, from what I understood, had pretty much just arrived a short time prior to that, so they were just getting it organized. Could you see World Trade Center 7 from the command post? No. Why is that? It was too cloudy. Cloud of dust was too heavy. Did you go by yourself with a group of people? Over to where? To World Trade Center 7. What it was, they gave out an assignment, I got on it. There were 4 engines, 3 trucks, and 21 battalion. That was the task force, and we went over together. When you say 4 engines, 3 trucks, do you mean 4 engines and 3 trucks, or do you mean something? Well, we obviously didn't have the apparatus. It was 4 groups of 1 officer, 5 firemen, so there were approximately about 30 some odd guys involved with this task force that was going to head over towards Building 7. We have marked in this case a map in the air, which was previously marked as Weidler 1. Let me show you that. I'm going to ask you what your route was when you went over from City Hall Park to World Trade Center 7. Okay. You might want to take a look at that. Just give people a chance to get a copy. Chief Boyle, can you identify the command post that was set up at the intersection of Nassau, Broadway, and Vesey, right in this big open area there? That's where the command post was set up. How did you proceed to Building 7? We went west on Vesey Street to Church Street, and right at Church Street, right at the intersection, there was a bunch of apparatus that were disabled. And that's when we started stripping the rigs, getting a hose, got a few harnesses, put together a few masks. And we pretty much had everything except the apparatus at that point. Then we proceeded north on Church Street, about Park Place, because we didn't want to go by number 5, because number 5 was fully involved, and they were worried about a collapse. In that, I mean, it was Warren. So then we went up to Park Place, and we went up a couple of blocks north just because of the size we were dealing with. Then we went on Park Place to West Broadway and proceeded south from there. Did you stop at all on Park Place and West Broadway, or did you immediately proceed south? No. At Park Place, I told my guys to just wait there, and me and the 21 Battalion. I don't remember if other officers came with us, but we started to walk towards Building 7. We weren't going to go in there right away. We were going to see what was going on, and together we walked down Vesey. When you went down walking Vesey Street, did you have a chance to observe the north side of the World Trade Center 7? Yep. What did you see? Nothing. It looked good. The north side looked good. The east side looked good. At some point, did you get into the corner of West Broadway and Vesey? Yes. I got right to the southwest corner. I had my hand on number 7. What caused you to go down to that corner? At the northeast corner, right where Vesey and West Broadway, the northeast corner, there was a unit of guys. There were a bunch of guys there on that corner. And I don't know if they had a stang or a hose line. And they were like trying to hit number 6, but water was just like, there was water on the sidewalk. There was no pressure in the hydrants. You could tell that there was a problem. When you say the northeast, what intersection are you referring to? Right where the U.S. Post Office is there, right at that, on Vesey, right there. That actually is the southeast corner of 7. That would be the southeast corner of 7, but it was the northeast corner of that intersection. That's what I meant. I understand. I wasn't referring to building 7. What other observation did you make when you reached that intersection? Well, I saw the guys there and they weren't doing anything with the hose, but I saw debris coming down from the south side of number 7. It was raining down on them. It wasn't heavy, but there was like burning material coming down and raining on them. So I was curious as to what was coming down on them. Where was it coming from? So what did you do? So I took a peek on the south side of number 7, building 7, to see what was coming down. How close were you to World Trade Center 7 right there? I was holding the corner of the building. The southeast corner of the building? Yeah, when I looked around the building. What did you see? I saw a large hole it was lower than midway up, and it was a gouge out of the building. I saw a little fire, some smoke, and I saw where the debris was coming from. Was it from that hole? It was from that hole. And that's when I called to the guys across the street. I said, I wouldn't stay there if I was you. There's stuff coming down out of there. About how many floors was the hole the gouge about? Probably about 5 stories. It was a good gouge. Was it more towards one side of the building? More towards the center of the building? I think it was towards the center of the building. Going to show you a depiction of the south side. I'm going to ask you if you could draw on what you saw. Sure. I may ask you a couple more questions before I ask you to draw. Chief Boyle, before you draw for me, could you tell me from your view whether it looked like it was something that had been a gouge that had been caused by something from the inside or from the outside? Objection. You can answer. You can answer. I couldn't tell you that, but it looked like something hit the building. What shape was it? It was like the hull of a ship, the hull of a boat, just kind of like that. More vertical than horizontal? Yes. Would you draw? I should mark it actually as Wheeler 2 before you do that. And as you could see, did you focus on other aspects of the south face? No. Really, the only reason I looked at the building was because the guys were getting hit by the stuff. That was it. Could you see from the corner of Vesey and West Broadway? Could you see the West Street from there? No. Why was that? The haze and the smoke. And that was the end of his testimony. And you could see throughout the 2 testimonies that there was extensive damage to World Trade Center 7. One from the southeast corner and one area of damage that was in the middle of the building. And in the building was the gouge. At the corner of the building was a huge part of the building that was missing. And we're not done. So I'm going to read from Chief Daniel Negro. Now, Daniel Negro is a height of a lot of these conspiracies. Now, everyone remembers the infamous video of Larry Silverstein talking about how the building was going to collapse, and he said, well, we're going to pull, and we just pulled it. And evidently, this talk to the fire chief was, according to many, Daniel Negro. Now, Daniel Negro did meet, it doesn't say with Silverstein, but he did say that he met with the proprietor of World Trade Center 7. The proprietor of World Trade Center 7 is Larry Silverstein. It's the only building that he owns. He rents the other towers. He rents them. They're owned by the Port Authority. World Trade Center 7 is his, right? So here is Daniel Negro's own testimony about World Trade Center 7. It's a big document itself. Here, Daniel Negro. Here we go. At least the first time that you did, that was before the 2 p.m. meeting, sure. At that time, did you recall making any observations of World Trade Center 7? I recall that I could see fire from the north side, sure, in various locations, not damage. Damage I could see from looking east down Vesey Street. let's start with the observations that you made on the north side. And perhaps before I ask you about that, can you tell me the route that you took to get from Chambers Street command post down towards the operational post? Just straight down the middle of West Street. Where were you when you made observations? Is that the north side of World Trade Center 7? Objection. I don't know. Somewhere between point A and point B. I don't know. Let me ask you more specifically. Do you recall turning down Barclay Street, walking on East Barclay Street as you made your way south? No, I don't recall that. What can you recall about the fires that you saw on the north side of the World Trade Center 7 at that time? Objection. At that time, I don't know. At various times of the day, I would say there was more fire in that building than I have seen in my career in a high-rise building, other than, of course, World Trade Centers 1 and 2, which would have been fantastic to see on any other day. On that day, it didn't seem that fantastic anymore because we had already seen more. But certainly, there was considerable fire in various locations, which were also unusual to have. Under normal condition, a fire starts at one floor and works its way up, and you might have a few floors on fire if the fire department can't get a handle on it. It is rare that you see fires on non-contiguous floors in a high-rise. You had observation of World Trade Center 7 once you reached the operational post on West and Vesey. Is that correct? Yes. At that point, I could see what I would call the front of the building, which was actually the back of the building. But I could see the southern side. Let me just clarify that. What do you mean when you say you could see the front of the building, which was actually the back of the building? You said the main entrance was on Barclay Street. If I did, I misled you. I apologize. I hope that I said the main entry was on Vesey Street, which is the south side of the building. Then I misheard you. The few times that I had been in the building to go to the OEM, that is where I would enter. We would come in off Vesey Street. What can you recall seeing on the southwest corner of the building from your location at West and Vesey? I saw some damage to the building, whether it was due to the structure, the facade, a piece missing out of the corner building. I thought it was very significant. Like I said, I had at various times OEM moved to a headquarters in that building. And when a major event was going to take place, the city would call meetings at the Office of Emergency Management. That's what OEM means. So we would go, and I had just recalled that building was an open type of lobby where you had to take a long escalator up to the elevators. So my non-engineering head told me that the building was built on a few big columns. That is what I thought. And seeing damage to it, firefighters look at things as if you take out a corner, that is bad. If a building is upheld by 6 columns and it loses one, this is bad. That was a concern of mine looking down the block, that this building is of unusual construction. And I'm not saying just unusual from my point of view, overlooking at high-rise buildings over my career, it was different. And structural damage may be more important to us here than it would have been if I was walking by the Empire State Building and I saw some portion of it, or the World Financial Center, where you could see some damage to it. At least the first time that you did, that was before the 2 p.m. meeting? Sure. At that time, do you recall making any observations of World Trade Center 7? And as you can see, this page I recopied. Sorry about that. I recopied from that. Okay, this is the page. Let me just reiterate. Okay, this is from the page. Any structural damage may be more important to us here than it would have been if I was walking by the Empire State Building. And I saw some portion of it, or the World Financial Center, where you would see some building. Upon reaching, I promised that we are going to move on shortly, but reaching the operational post at West and Vesey, did you, after having any observations, make your way to any other side of World Trade Center 7? I know at some point I was further south, went through the World Financial Center down to the area of Liberty and West. You couldn't go down West Street. You could go through the Winter Garden and through Financial 2 and come out the other end. I don't think I ever went east, so my views would be more from the northwest and south. The trip that you eventually took to the World Financial Center in Liberty and West, was that before the 2 p.m. meeting? I would have to look at the timeline. The only thing I could put up a timestamp on is while I was in Winter Garden, I was listening to the rescue efforts of the folks who were being miraculously taken out of the stair tower in One World Trade Center. The people that were trapped in the stair tower was Deputy Chief Jay Jonas, and there was a great documentary called The Hotel, or World 9/11 Hotel, it was called. And it talked about this small group of firefighters and civilians that they were helping down because there was one woman who was on a wheelchair. And I think there was like 5 firefighters. And they walked down the stairwell, the South Tower, excuse me, the South Tower, and the building collapsed on them. And this one area of the World Trade Center survived. And it was the stair tower that Jay Jonas was bringing that woman in the wheelchair down from. Everything else of that building collapsed, but that stairwell. And I think that's good. If you haven't seen it, please watch 9/11 Hotel. It's one of the best documentaries I ever saw on 9/11. I would say that was making that first trip down, that rescue was going on, because it struck me that they were actually mistaken. I'm saying they were rescuing people from number 1, North Tower. I'm sorry, the North Tower, not the South Tower. I thought that whoever gave that report was lost because I didn't feel anyone could have survived that collapse. So that is the only way that I could. I don't know what time that was, but it was probably, there's probably some way to figure out when those people were taken out. I don't remember. At some point, you left the operational post of West and Vesey, correct? Yes, back and forth. Let's talk about the 2 p.m. meeting. You described that you participated in a 2 p.m. meeting. Where was that meeting? We used the auditorium, part of the auditorium on the community, the New York Community College up West Street. When you say the New York Community College, as the Borough Manhattan Community College, yes. On the west side, yes. On the east side of the street, across from Stuyvesant High School. A few of us went inside the auditorium so we could discuss that and other things. But that is where it was held. Who conveyed the meaning? I did. Did you request a certain chief's officer be present? I think we in the fire department, we have the staff chiefs, which are the highest ranking members of the department. The surviving members that were there, I think, was able to bring them all into the meeting. It might have been Chief Carruthers, Frank Carruthers, Mike Butler, Harry Myers, and these are all the chiefs who weren't at the scene at the initial collapse, but made their way afterwards. Myself, Chief Turi, our chief of safety, and Frank Fellini might have attended. I don't know if he left the operations post or not, but it is possible. One of the purposes of the meeting was to talk about World Trade Center 7. Yes. One of the many purposes. Right. At that point, what were you told about World Trade Center 7? I think it was repeated that the people that observed it, either from outside or inside, their feeling was that we had fires that we were unable to extinguish, specifically with the lack of water supply, that there was significant structural damage to the building, and that committing further people to search the building, A, which we were told was vacant, or to attempt to extinguish the fires would be futile, and it was decided that we would establish a collapse zone and not operate within that zone. Not let anyone operate within that zone, and we went back down to Vesey and West Street to carry out that order. Do you recall asking the staff chiefs, who were present, anything in particular about World Trade Center 7 in order to make your evaluation? Other than what I just said about their feelings about the damage and about the fire, no. Here, do you know whether when you had this conversation at the 2 p.m. meeting, there were firefighters present in World Trade Center 7 again at that time? I don't know. There might have been because there were no orders given not to be, so it is quite possible. Was it during this meeting that you decided that a collapse zone would be established around World Trade Center 7? Yes. So, now, by the way, this would refute anything that Alex Jones and Richard Gage referred to in that tweet. So the countdown that Alex Jones claims he was hearing wasn't a countdown for the explosion. Wasn't a countdown for its collapse. And a collapse zone was created because the fire department saw that there was enough damage and enough fire for it to collapse. Now, unless Alex Jones and Richard Gage are going to go on record and say that these fire chiefs are lying or wrong, I would like to see a refutation video showing that. Because they weren't there. And I'm not saying the building, again, I'll reiterate, I'm not saying that maybe early in the day, bombs exploded during the collapse of World Trade Center 1 and 2 to mask the explosions, or that there might have been compromise to the beams during these collapses. I'm not saying that. That very well could have happened to mask the collapse, because obviously the collapses of World Trade Centers 1 and 2 would most definitely drown out the explosives going off in World Trade Center 7. And since everyone is running away from the building, no one could see the explosions going on or hearing it. Look, I don't know. It's a hypothetical, but it's a much more reasonable hypothetical than anything that Gage and Alex Jones are saying. And this is the reason why I'm doing this stuff, why I'm reading you stuff from the 9/11 Commission or the Joint House Inquiry or from the CIA and the FBI or from the fire department, because not everyone's a fucking liar, okay? Now, some people may not be getting information at the time, so they can't connect the dots. That's why you wait in time to see what documents and files are coming loose, either through the declassification process or from people actually wanting to talk about the issue 20 years later or 10 years later, whatever. This is the reason why I read this stuff, so you can make up your mind and you can put pieces together. Let's go back to it. Do you recall whether there was one overriding factor that caused you to decide to establish the collapse zone around World Trade Center 7? I think it was more the three-headed reason: the absence of people in the building, the fires, and the damage. I don't know if anyone would have enough to make that decision. Sir, do you recall giving a deposition in 2003 concerning the FDNY's response to the events of September 11th? I gave a deposition in 2003. It could have been at some point in the case that involved the World Trade Center. Not specifically 7, but the entire operation, yes. A very long deposition. We're not going to go through it all here today. Blah, 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 right? So he's talking about the deposition that he gave. I'm not going to read everything, right? And it talks about World Trade Center 1, stuff like this, stuff like that. So now you know why there was a collapsed perimeter, right? Why there was a collapsed perimeter. And it was given by the chief of operations, Daniel Negro, the main chief of the FDNY, okay? That's who set up the collapse zone. And the other fire chiefs that were involved. And one of them was Frank Carruthers. He's important in all this, okay? Let's read his summary. Frank Carruthers, Chief Frank Carruthers, right? And I'm not going to read the beginning because it just asks him, by the way, what company you work for, this and that. I'll go right to what they're talking about, World Trade Center 7, and then we'll talk about from there. So it was overall command at the World Trade Center. Yes, he had told me that the command post had moved north. At this point, it was probably around Chambers. Chambers Street. What position did Chief Fellini assume at that point? When he turned over command to me, I told him that I was designating him as the operations officer, that he should remain at the large area that's outlined in. That's colored lined in blue at this map, the actual campus collapse site. And I would go up to the new location at the command post, right? So he's talking about the command post operations. And, again, I'm not going to waste my time reading all this stuff. We'll talk about this. Okay. Do you know whether Chief Fellini himself went to look at World Trade Center 7? My understanding is that he viewed it. Did he indicate whether he had any concerns about the integrity of the building personally? I expect that he did, but I don't recall any. Did you yourself take a look at World Trade Center 7? only from a distance. He described the damage. From what I knew about the building and what was discussed then, that was enough for me to direct him to clear an area as a collapse zone, anticipating the collapse of 7. So here's another fire chief getting from word of another fire chief, Chief Fellini, about the damage and fires to World Trade Center 7 was enough. So they thought the building would come down. Okay. So we got 4 fire chiefs on record saying that the building was going to collapse. Was a determination also made to cease any firefighting efforts at the building? We were pulling everybody out of an area 360 degrees around large enough for a 50-story building to fall in any direction, since we couldn't really predict which direction it might fall. So if you're going to say that the fire department was in on it, that the building was going to implode in a certain direction, here you have Chief Carruthers basically saying he didn't know what side of the building was going to collapse, how it was going to collapse, and where it was going to collapse. Again, why I read information to you, unlike certain so-called self-professed experts that won't give you the whole picture because they think that the FDNY and NYPD are in on it. That's why. That's why. Why else would Alex Jones write that tweet? Why would he post it? And why would Richard Gage retweet it knowing what Alex Jones is about? But was it the plan that if they would be pulled out from the building at that point? Once we made the decision, when you create a collapse zone, everyone is taken out of it. That's the idea of it. The idea was that we expected that this building would come down. My goal at that point was not to lose any more people. Other than the damage you described to the corners of the building, were you advised anything about any other damage to the building at that point? We knew that there was significant fires in the building. There was other damage because it wasn't just those 2 spots that were struck. I don't have any more information specifically about damage to certain areas or others. How large was the collapse zone that was established? Objection. Asked and answered. I think he described it. I'm sorry, did you already describe it? I think he said large enough for a 50-story building. My directions were to Chief Fellini to establish a collapse zone large enough for a 50-story building to fall in any direction. I understand. Can you tell me, in making the decision to pull the firefighters away and create the collapse zone, what factors or reasons did you consider? What was important to you in making that decision? Again, I object. I think that's been answered. You can answer the question. Primarily, the damage done by the impact, the fact that there was an atrium in the building, the fires. Did the loss of life at the towers affect the decision? I made up my mind when I assumed command that my primary responsibility was to the living, and that we had, although we had a strong obligation to conduct searches and extinguishment operations where we could, and that those in the building are inherently dangerous. So it wasn't that we weren't going to do any things that were involved danger, but there had to be a favorable risk-reward analysis to justify committing people. What was the upside? What were we going to get? And at that point, not only the firefighters, but the police officers, the Port Authority workers, OEM people, everyone was there. The first obligation is to the people who are alive, and then decide what is the likelihood of a successful effort compared to the risk of the lives of others. Do you know whether or not any water remains, any of the water mains were broken when World Trade Center 1, 2 collapsed? Yes, there were. What was your knowledge of that? Do you know which water mains? My understanding was that there had been significant damage to the water supply in the area. We had fireboats responding. We were stretching lines from the fireboats onto land to provide water supply to fight fires. Do you know if any water boats were being used to fight fires at World Trade Center 7 at that point in time? Do I know for a fact? I don't have knowledge of which lines went from which fireboat locations to which specific locations. The fact that senior chiefs were reporting what they saw at World Trade Center 7, how did that affect your decision? Object to the form of the question. You can answer. This was not a top-down decision. This was basically a bottom-up decision. They made the first-hand observations and expressed their concerns and reservations and passed them up to the line. Some of them I knew personally, although at this point, I really can't remember exactly who was there, but their observations and concerns weighed heavily. As I understand your testimony, it was their observations about damage to the building? Yes. Did there come a point in time where you met with Chief Negro? Yes. When did you meet with Chief Negro? When I went up to Chamber Street to the command post, Chief Negro's location was unknown. At some point after that, well, earlier, he had been sent by Chief Gansey around, I've been told, to the east side of the campus to check conditions there. And it's my understanding that's where he was when the collapses took place. It took some time after for him to find out where we were and to work his way back there. Your understanding as to where he was that information you know now as opposed to information you knew on that day? There was information I know now that I came to know probably later that day or in the following couple of days. All I knew initially was that his location was unknown, but at some point he showed up at the command post at Chamber Street. When was that in relation to your returning to the command post from West and Vesey, do you think? I don't recall him being there when I left to speak to Chief Fellini. I am not at all certain whether he got there after I returned to the command post or whether he was there when I got back. I probably know the answer to the next question, but do you have any idea as to when the meeting with Chief Negro might have been? It depends on what you mean by meeting. There was a time when I was operating and Chief Negro was, although he was at a higher position, had not really resumed command. So what I was doing was making decisions and informing him of what I was doing immediately prior to, or I was doing it. There came a time a little later when he resumed his proper position. And although we had been having conversations as we were operating, I believe it was sometime around 2:00 in the afternoon that he called an actual meeting. Before we get to that meeting, did you report to him the decisions you had made with respect to firefighting efforts at World Trade Center 7 and the creation of the collapse zone? Yes. Tell me about the meeting. Who was present at the meeting? This is the meeting which called Chief Negro. Negro, myself, Fellini, Chief Callan, the safety chief, whose name is escaping me, Turi. Yes, Turi was there, and probably several others. Who is Chief Callan? And he talks about Chief Callan, and he talks about Chief Fellini and this stuff. What did Chief Negro say to the group at that meeting? Well, the one issue that I recall is he asked all the chiefs as a group if they thought we were being too conservative in maintaining the collapse area around World Trade Center 7. It was unanimous that we were not being too conservative and that it should be maintained. Do you recall whether damage to the building was discussed or mentioned during that meeting? I don't recall that it was, but I don't recall the specific conversation. What's the effect of creating a collapse zone? Let me ask you this. I think you answered this already. In terms of firefighting efforts at World Trade Center 7, creating a collapse zone, and that was withdrawn. What's the effect of creating a collapse zone that extended the length of a 50-story building in each direction? What's the extent on that, on rescue efforts? Well, within the collapse zone, they were stopped. And that was a particularly difficult thing to do. Again, not just for the firefighters. Everyone who had responded, I'm including the Port Authority people in Neil's efforts, were not only responding as they had always in their roles up to that date. Normally, when you respond, you don't step into a situation where you have knowledge that among the victims are a number of your own people. So that adds the emotional content of everything that is done and said and thought. Did you have an opportunity to observe World Trade Center 7 at any point in the afternoon of 9/11 to your recollection? Down the street. What do you mean by down the street? I'm sorry, down on Vesey Street at the intersection with West Street. I did enter that block in front of the Verizon building. When was that in relation to the various meetings that we've been talking about or discussing that we've been talking about? I'm sure that I did after. I'm not certain that I did it before, but I may have. When he said after, and you said meetings, I don't know whether he means all the meetings. The 2:00 meeting. Thank you. I know it wasn't my turn, but I just wanted to clarify. That's fine. Do you have any recollection of your observations of World Trade Center 7 at that point? Only that my observations coincided with what had been described to me earlier. What specifically did you see? That there had been, that the building appeared to be damaged. There was a lot of damage, but that it appeared to be particularly damaged on those front two corners. What is your recollection in terms of the fires in the building? I really don't have a separate specific memory of fires. There were fires in all of these buildings. But you knew from your discussions with the others that there was fires inside, and that decision had already been made. There were a lot of others that still needed to be made. You also testified earlier that the damages to the corners of the building, there was other damage to the building. Did you personally observe that, or was that information you received from others? Objection to the form. Go ahead. What I was talking about was various impact to the front of the building that I observed. Can you be more specific? What did you actually see that was obvious? I'm going to object to the form. Again, he can answer. What did you see? A building that it looked like him bombarded with large, heavy objects. And not just in the corners of the building. The damage to the corners was what stood out amongst from the other damage. And that was the testimony, important testimony from Frank Carruthers. And I'm going to read one more, just one more, just to reiterate and hammer home the importance of, having, I'm sorry, that was Peter Hayden, of having, I'm sorry, Frank Carruthers. I'm going to read Peter Hayden now, of having the decisions made from the fire department's highest levels, which were the fire chiefs themselves, right? Now, this is this is from Peter Hayden. I'm sorry, Peter Hayden. This is the last one I'm going to read. And there was a number of others I could have read, right? Good morning, Chief Hayden. And this is, Chief Hayden, retired, talking about stuff like that. So we'll go up to, okay. Did you have any equipment with you to help make your observations? Well, subsequent to our observations, my observation and other chief officers that were present, we requested that our Special Operations Command, that our rescue companies set up transits because we were worried about the structural stability of the building. Let's talk about, for the benefit of those here who may not know what transits are. What is a transit? It keeps an eye on the building, basically just to see whether or not there's any movement in the building. Did you order that transits be set up on September 11th? I don't recall if I specifically gave the order, but the order was given by one of the chief officers. And just tell me briefly how a transit works. Well, it sets up a line along the property about the building line, the property line. The building line, and keeps an eye on it and will detect any movement or sway in the building. If there is any movement at all, the firefighter who was using the transit will usually notify the chief officer of that. We use that transit throughout the city anytime we're involved in fire operations or emergency operations where we suspect there's a structural problem with the building. Is there a magnifying capability in the transit as well? I don't know it that well. Do you know roughly what time the transit was set up? Sometime after 11 o'clock in the morning. I think you indicated where it was set up, but again, where was it? Well, I think there was a number of transits set up, but I know for sure there was one set up on Vesey Street looking east towards World Trade Center 7, and marks on the exhibit. We've had a document which had been marked as an exhibit before, which is a map of the area. It's been marked as Wheeler 1 in the past. Just for our edification, if you look at this map, it shows the intersection of West and Vesey. Where on the map specifically would you have been? Probably about 50 feet into West Street on Vesey, west of West Street. So you'd be somewhere where it says Vesey Street on the map, where it says street, that area, somewhere around there? Right, exactly. And that gave you a view of World Trade Center 7. Yes. Once the transit was set up, were you operating the transit or was someone else? No. Firefighters from Special Operations operate the transit. And do you know the names of any of those people? No. Did you yourself? What was the results of the transit? What was observed? I don't recall any information being received from the firefighters that was observing the transit. That might have been relayed to some other chief at that time. I was assigned further down to Western Levity. That's where I spent most of my time working later. What did you observe when you were there? What I saw, what was viewed to me to be a bulge in the southwest corner of World Trade Center 7, somewhere between the 7th and 12th floors. Heavy fire condition on several floors of the World Trade Center 7? Could you tell whether the bulge extended past the corner, either south or west, from where you were located? I couldn't tell. When you made that observation, did you observe damage to the southwest corner of the building too? Well, a bulge in the corner of the building would be described as damage, in my view. Did you observe other damage as well? No, I didn't witness any other structural damage other than that. And of course, the fire that was occurring on several floors in the building. And where was the fire that you observed? Several different floors. At that time, were you observing the bulge? What was your understanding as to what the bulge reflected in terms of the building? Objection. You can answer. You have to rephrase it. I'm not sure what you're asking me. Did your observation of the bulge in any way affect your opinion as to the, or feeling as to the stability of the building? Objection. Well, certainly, when you see something like that subsequent to what had just occurred previously in the hour before, we were concerned about the structural stability of the building. And at some point in that time, that became a topic of discussion. And did your observation of the bulge, was that a factor in that discussion? Yes. Had you prior at that time observed the bulge in any early observations of the building? Yes. I noticed a tremendous amount of fire on a number of floors. So here we have a fourth fire chief saying that there was a large number of fires on a lot of the floors of World Trade Center 7. So for those like Richard Gage and Alex Jones and others saying that there was little pockets of fire, that's not what's coming from the fire chiefs and the firemen. So I don't know where they got that from, but it didn't come from these people because I'm reading you the testimony of these people. This is the reason why I'm doing it, because no one else is doing it, right? So now you're informed. Had you received any reports or heard anyone reporting up the condition of World Trade Center 7? Any other chiefs? There was a lot of radio transmissions regarding 7 World Trade Center, most of it focused on the fire conditions. Do you remember hearing any reports from other chiefs about damage to the building? No. There were the bulge in the southwest corner. I brought that to the attention of some of the chief's officers there. I don't know if they observed that on their own. I'm not sure. I don't recall. But at some point in time, I did bring that to the attention of the other chiefs, and including Chief Fellini. I don't recall the chiefs that were specifically present in the discussions at that time, but he was present there that day. So did you have any discussions with Chief Collot about his observations of the building? I don't specifically recall any conversation with Chief Collot, but once again, he was there that day, and I may have had some discussions about him. How about Chief Hay, if you remember? He was there also. Did you observe that with your own eyes, or were you actually observing it through the transit? My own eyes. But what happened to be in that location? Because that's where the transit was located. No, I observed the bulge prior to the placement of the transit. What was that one of the reasons that why you requested the transit? Yes. Did you report your observations? You indicated you report your observations of the bulge to other chiefs, but any recollection more specific than that in terms of who it might have been you talked to? The names you mentioned were all present that day. There was a number of group discussions going on among the chiefs. Our command posts have been destroyed. Our chief departments have been killed. Our deputy commissioner have been killed. So many of the discussions revolved around a half a dozen or so chiefs at that particular time and how we were going to approach the rest of the day. Did the result in the creation of a collapse zone around World Trade Center? Did that result in the creation of a collapse zone around World Trade Center 7? Yes. Do you know when that was created? I think shortly after we discussed the structural stability of the building and of the discussions we had subsequent to that, we decided to establish a collapse zone. Were there the discussions about the structural stability of the building? Well, what we were worried about is the collapse at some point in time. We had a discussion with a gentleman who has identified himself as an engineer. We posed to him the question that considering the structural damage that was obvious to the building on the southwest corner and the amount of fire damage that was occurring within the building, could we anticipate a collapse in the building? Would it collapse, and if so, when? He said yes, and he gave an approximate time of about 5 to 6 hours, which was pretty much right on the money because the building collapsed about 5 o'clock that afternoon. After the discussion, the transit was set up, of course, and the collapse zones were established. Do you know who the engineer was? No, I don't recall. Do you know who he was affiliated with? I don't recall. So that discussion would have been somewhere around noontime? I think earlier than that even. Is that someone, an engineer, who had been called to the scene or was just on the scene? He certainly was. He was on the scene. I don't know if he was called there, or did the loss of life that occurred early in the day affect the decision with respect to the creation of the collapse zone? Well, the decision not to attempt to extinguish the fire in the building was based on the fact that, number one, the amount of fire that was occurring in the building, the fact that the buildings had been searched and evacuated, and thirdly, and most importantly, I think at that point in time, we had already lost 400 firefighters. The building at that time we deemed to be vacant, and we decided not to risk any more firefighters' lives that day. Do you know what the situation was with respect to the availability of water? We had a water supply problem during the day, and for quite a number of days afterwards, because some of the water mains were destroyed by the collapse of the North and South Towers. Do you know whether there was any water available for World Trade Center 7? Water for fire extinguishment? Yes. My recollection was that there was water available. How effective the pressure was, or the volume that they was able to generate, I don't recall. Do you know whether the standpipes were working World Trade Center 7 on at the time the fire was reported to be in service? Do you know who reported that? They were in service. And so that was the testimony of Chief Hayden, who basically got word from an engineer about the damages to World Trade Center 7 and said that the building would basically collapse in about 4 to 5 hours. Who the engineer was, I don't know. But that's the testimony of the fire chiefs. And the reason for reading that is to inform Alex Jones and Richard Gage's followers that the collapse zone was created because the fire chiefs and the firefighters deemed the building to be vulnerable to a collapse. And that's why they set up transit zones and they pulled out all the firefighters from the building, because from their vantage point, they saw that there was a large number of fires untreated and that the extent of damage that could be seen even from the outside was enough to give pause about resuming operations there. And if you went by Richard Gage's retweet of Alex Jones, you would think that, oh, well, the police department and the fire department, they were in on this operation of imploding World Trade Center 7. And that's disingenuous. Really fucking disingenuous. That's the reason why I took hours out of my time to read you this information, because they won't do it. Okay, that was the point of this video. The point of the video was to do that, to read you the testimony of the fire chiefs in response to Alex Jones' tweet. Okay, listen, guys, have a great holiday on Monday. Stay safe, and any more updates regarding 9/11 or what's going on with the Israel-Palestine Gaza issue, I will report to you without bias and without prejudice.